Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. Coming to you from Studio B, WOUB Radio. I am Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke this morning.
You certainly are. And today we're going to talk about, I'm not really sure what we're going to talk about, but it's reimagining Appalachia. But we're joined by people who do know what we're talking about. And that's Natalia Rudiak. Hi, Natalia. And also Ted Boettner. Ted?
Hello.
Why don't I start with you and let you just introduce yourself, tell us what you do, where you are, what you want, your life in 5 seconds.
Okay, see what I can do. Yeah, I'm a senior researcher at the Ohio River Valley Institute, which is a sort of a think and do tank located in Pennsylvania. I live here in Charleston, West Virginia, and I'd say my goal is just to sort of use research and analysis to help advance shared prosperity through the region, whether it's people, projects, or policy, whatever we can do to get a better deal for working families.
Okay, and Natalia, why don't you tell us what you do and what you're all about?
Okay, my name is Natalia Rudiak. I direct special projects at Reimagine Appalachia. For avid listeners of the show, you may know that Reimagine is a coalition of over 100 organizations, and we try to find that sweet spot and try to negotiate points of agreement with racial justice, labor union, and climate action groups. And we have over also 100 local elected officials and faith leaders who endorse our work, specifically the Appalachian Climate Blueprint, Infrastructure Blueprint, which is a document that we have used to springboard investments in Northern Appalachia, because if we're not at the table, we'll be on the menu. So we work with TED frequently to move forward that shared prosperity and local wealth.
Okay, well, and one of the things, Ted, that I understand that you're working on is a full employment project. Is that right? Or a conference or a discussion? What exactly? How are you going to give everybody jobs? I'll just jump in there.
Right? Gosh, if I could do that, I'll tell you what, that'd be something. So, I think when we look at Appalachia especially, it's been a region that's definitely been apart from the rest of the nation for much of its history. And when you look at the economic prosperity of the region, the health, education, infrastructure, it's just lagged behind for decades. And a big part of that has to do with, sort of the natural resource extraction economy in the region and other factors as well. But in all, what that's led to is a persistent poverty and also persistent low levels of employment in the region. And, there's been talk for decades and there's been programs, a lot of listeners might, remember the Workers' Progress Administration or the Civilian Conservation Corps, or there's several other smaller ones that are sort of at the more local level as well. But this idea that, if people don't have jobs and they want jobs, which most people do that don't have them, we should be able to connect those two fairly easily. And so people from, Dr. Martin Luther King up until, FDR and lots of other policymakers, especially in the 70s, and lately too, some other policymakers have pushed this notion that we need to guarantee employment for people. People have many barriers to employment, as you know, whether it's being in and out of the criminal justice system, whether it's having to get out of the labor force to care for an elder, whether it's, going back to school part-time but still wanting to work part-time, whether it's a disability that somebody has but they still want to get in the workforce, whether it's transportation issues and an inability to get there, whether it's having a driver's license. All of these things can be barriers to employment. So we've never really taken a comprehensive approach and said, hey, what can we do to ensure that these areas that we can guarantee employment? That's sort of a radical thing at one end, but it's something to aspire to. And I think, if we play our cards right, and if policies were put in place, I think the region could at least get close to where the national rates are. So, I mean, this idea of full employment has been around for a long time, and it can have enormous impacts because the most persistent problem, one of them, when we look at poverty, poor health, poor education outcomes, whatever they are, a lot of it comes back to the idea of just not having a job, not having a source of consistent employment. And this is especially true in rural areas and especially true in areas where you have large amounts of natural resource extraction that have pushed out other business investment in those areas. We have a very undiverse economy, less diverse economy, and it's led to these problems. We can get into some of those if you guys want to. Also, the region was just hit so hard through deindustrialization. So, when steel collapsed in the late 70s, early 80s, coal mines shut down as well, in towns like Gary, West Virginia, that were owned primarily by U.S. Steel. So that deindustrialization left us with a population that were, heavily into manufacturing of glass, steel, other things as well, chemical manufacturing. When those all collapsed in the late 70s, early 80s, it led to a huge outmigration of people in the region, but it also led to persistent joblessness in the region. So the idea is, a national federal program, but also, I think when we look at our region, especially, that it's a place that has needed something like this for a very long time.
Well, I wanted to throw out a couple of things. One is when you started, not to cause political controversy, but you
Oh,
started
started. Right.
Yeah, well,
started with, sounding like there was nothing before this sort of extraction economy happened. And the thing is that the first thing that happened in Appalachia is that we took away the culture of the people, the indigenous people that were thrown out and all the things that went on there. And I always feel like that's a big part of why we've always been in trouble, is because we lost our way right off the get-go. But then so I gotta throw that out there. But because I think we have to honor what already happened before the white guy showed up. That's all. Then the other piece is I was thinking, it's all fine and good that we want to have full employment. And I totally agree. People's values are so tied up in what they do and how they do it. But a lot of the people that I see in my region are people who use their back to make a living, and that's being erased more and more and more. And so how do we get people to a more skilled level so they can make a living, not just get a paycheck? So that's my first question. And then that leads me to, where the heck is the broadband?
Well, that's on number 2 on my list
I
here, but
know, I know. And so
uh-huh.
all these things that we have to overcome. And I think we start out with a lot of positives because people want a job, like you said. I think they do, but they want a job they can be proud of.
Mhm.
And they also want to be like other people. They don't want to just get the minimum whatever. So I just think there's so many steps. How do we get there?
Okay, well, I'm sure Ted has that answer, right, on how we solve the chronic poverty problem of Appalachia. But I guess just mentioning that, it occurs to me that all of the well-meaning programs in the world will not work if they're persists with this kind of learned helplessness behavior. It seems to me there's something overlying the region that we've had, at least in my lifetime, 40, 50, 60 years of perpetual recession. It seems like this resource, yeah, you can blame extraction economies, you can blame deindustrialization, but there's something within the area that is like a learned helplessness, it feels to
A
me.
cultural
Yeah,
norm.
cultural, or it's like
yeah.
it's
It's
like looking to the lord of the manor to fix things, and that guy's already moved to the Bahamas, and there is no one leading.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of economists and others that have talked about what's quote unquote called the Appalachian effect,
Yeah.
and trying to explain those things. I'm not a huge proponent of getting into cultural mores of why people don't do or blaming people for being on welfare because it's a lifestyle. I mean, I think you have to be very careful in those assessments because I think the cultural arguments are what fill the gaps when we don't have an idea of what's happening. Uh, and that was you can go back to Michael Harrington's Other America, or several other books have been written about Appalachia that try to put everything in the cultural realm. I've just never been convinced. I guess I'm too much of a maybe a little bit of a Marxist. I don't think that
Mhm.
those are the primary structural reasons for the lack of job opportunities or chalked up to cultural things. I think they more have to do with structural things within our economy, within the structures of how things were made, whether it was, we can look at Appalachia, especially about land ownership. Absentee land ownership was a huge issue in this place, and that definitely determined that outside absentee land ownership definitely played a large role in the formation of the economy. But in terms of extraction, I mean, it's just I'm in Kanawha County, West Virginia, and Kanawha County, was the birthplace, not the birthplace, but it's actually Kanawha means white rock, and that meant salt. And that was the very
Yeah.
first thing, the first mines that were here right when the state formed, even before. And then it was timber, and then it was oil, and then it was coal, and now we're in a huge renaissance of natural gas and extraction. So it's been a pretty familiar and pretty consistent theme throughout the region, and very few places have ever been able to, solve the sort of resource curse. When you have a boom and bust economy that's not conducive to business investment, it leads to outmigration and low economic diversity and just long run poor economic performance. We've definitely seen that out. I mean, West Virginia, for instance, the only state that's completely in Appalachia, we had over 2 million people in 1950. Now we have about 1.75. That's pretty, it's
Yeah,
the
I
only
was
state
gonna.
that lost
You
population at that time. But the structural factors are just, I mean, these things were pointed out too by scholars over the years as well, but just by people that have worked in the labor movement and others about some of these key reasons why the state has suffered that. And it is a rural state, and people have a sense of independence in those things. I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying, like, there are other rural places that have much better economic and social outcomes,
sure.
at least as we measure them. I mean, like, these, you can get into all kinds of debates on whether you want to see industrialization or not, but we need a goods producing economy, I think. People who actually do real jobs that produce actual things, because we have a lot of jobs that aren't producing much. That's especially true in the financial sector. So that that low population density of the area, the proximity to markets, the poor physical infrastructure, which you talked about, the broadband, is sure a hindrance on growth. But what we've really seen too is that when you have physically demanding jobs, exactly what we talked about, you have more workplace injuries, you have more disabilities, and this provided a fertile ground for the opioid crisis as well. Because when you do that, and if you cut things like, if you reduce benefits like workers' compensation, you privatize it like we did in West Virginia, you make it harder to get it. You got to try to get to work. And if a little pill came around and said, "Hey, we can get you to work tomorrow if you just take this pill," that can cause a whole host of problems.
Okay, well, right on cue. We were just about to shift over to broadband. So if you see a little blip in the recording, it's because broadband just failed us here in Appalachia. But before we get into that, I want to mention that you are listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, coming to you from Studio B, WOUB Radio in Athens, Ohio, reminding you it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
Thank God.
Thank God. So we're joined today by Natalia Rudiak and Ted Boettner, and we were just talking about some of the full employment issues, some of the historical extraction economy type issues that have been plaguing Appalachia since really it became known as Appalachia. But Natalia, I wanted to get in because to my way of thinking, one of the things right now, one of the key elements is the lack of broadband, the lack of connectivity, because this is a beautiful region, and people want to come and relocate to Appalachia, but their ability to do their job is hindered by the fact that there is no reliable broadband in many parts, if not most parts of the region. So what are you going to do about that?
What are we going to do about that? Well, I'm going to also lean on my friend Ted. I don't
Mhm.
know how involved, Ted, you have been involved with this broadband research. Uh,
Well, some of the issues I know are simply geographical, right? You know, we have
yeah.
a limited population base, so many of the companies, when they look at it from a economic incentive, they say, "Listen, it's just not worth our while to be stringing lines." Every 4 miles, we get a connection. You know, it costs us $30,000 to provide $50 a month service to somebody. It's just not going to happen. So then you say, okay, well, what about wireless? And we've got mountains and trees
But they
and
aren't charging
well,
$50
I
a
know
month.
they're
They're
not.
charging hundreds of
Well,
dollars.
so how do we address this? How do we? I mean, this always every time I talk to elected officials, I say this is like the electrification of rural America in the 1930s, 1940s, where we made as a country the decision that everyone deserved electricity. So we were going to set up a system that provided it. Well, broadband is the electricity of this century. Why do we not have the same political will at this point?
Well, I would say we don't have a base of labor unions to provide that political will that,
Yeah.
Hmm.
that gave us the New Deal and public works projects. I'd also say, unfortunately, we don't believe in public work anymore. We believe in giving checks to the private sector and subsidizing them to do it. Uh, and that has been gone for a while, unfortunately. But you're absolutely right. It's not in their. I mean, I wrote a report, God, 2008 or 2009 with the Central Appalachian Regional Network. I don't know if you all are familiar with them,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
identifying this, so it's like deja vu. I'm like, how many times it's been going on for 15 years?
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously it's not in their economic interest to sometimes put out, like you said, these lines into rural communities because the numbers just don't make sense. Well, you and I know they make sense because not everything should be down to cost. It should be the value of what you're providing. And that value is important because it's important for the development of the community to have a good foundation of infrastructure in order to have the ability to achieve prosperity or to achieve a good economy that works for all of us. And I think we get that. And that's usually where the state steps in because nobody else is going to do it. Uh,
Well, here's the thing, Ted. So we're still not counting the true cost of this when we don't provide it. But secondly, there's a lot of pushback from corporations in small communities where the small communities had tried to create their own broadband and
yeah,
did it, and then they passed laws making them stop. And so
absolutely.
you can't have it both ways. Well, apparently the corporations can.
Yeah, we
So
just don't have political power. I mean, it's
yeah. So
um,
I think this comes back to your comment about consistent employment, where, how do we push for the reality of the true cost of not having broadband, of not having access to the technology? To me, that's where we make the sale.
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, there are pockets of places that have done fairly well, like in Hardy County, like HardyNet, which is a
Yeah.
cooperative that provides very
Hmm.
high speed broadband. They don't have in friend of mine lives in Hardy County and he doesn't have cell service, but his broadband's a lot faster than mine in Charleston, West Virginia, and it's a lot better. And it was a really good example of that being done in a way, in a good way. Obviously, there's places like Chattanooga. There's other places that have done that thing, but those preemptive bills, as you talked about, have gotten in the way of the ability to do that. But it's even local communities not being willing to challenge the monopolies that are in
Yeah.
our communities. Like in West, I'm in Charleston. We have two choices. That's it, basically. So I mean, yeah, it's just it's called a market failure. It's like childcare. It's a market failure, right? You
Yeah.
have to
Mhm.
do something
Yeah.
about it because it's expensive. But if you want, if you want people to be into the workforce And because we need two incomes these days in order to make ends meet, you have to have childcare, and it has to be affordable, and it's not. So
Well,
it's a market.
Natalia, did you have something to add on that?
I did actually. So Reimagine Appalachia has been working on basic broadband principles that we'd like to see across our 4 states. And kind of the reasoning behind this is, and I'm looking at this right now. Let me count. uh 14.2 billion for this is coming out of the infrastructure, sorry, I say infrastructure, Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. We have 14 billion for affordable connectivity programs. We have 2 billion for a broadband reconnect program through the rural utility service. We have 2.75 billion for digital equity planning and 1 billion for middle mile connection. So someone else can do the math, but we have billions of dollars that are available out there through federal investments. Again, we keep saying this, but this really is transformational investment. And I used to say this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, but I'm not going to say that anymore because we
Yeah,
need to keep pushing for more
that's right.
points of
That's right.
transformation because we can do it, we can succeed. But Reimagine Appalachia, we're having an event. It's virtual on Tuesday, May 9th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with partners that are local. We'll talk about local friendly elected officials from all levels of government. We're going to have labor unions. We're going to have community based organizations to really figure out how to push through this bureaucracy. And like some folks have said, push through some of the tired politics as usual because we
Mhm.
have this funding that we absolutely need to harness. We need to convince people in our communities and our local officials that, hey, if you don't do this, this is going to pass us by. This is going to go to the Dakotas. This is going to go,
Right.
to other
Right.
places in the US. So
Hmm.
if you go to reimagineappalachia.org and click on events, you'll see this event. Please sign up. It'll be really, really interesting. We'll talk about these broadband principles. We'll talk about this funding available. We'll talk about what we need to do to get more funding and how to leverage state funding and maybe even local funding with that. So I really encourage people to come to that event to continue this deep dive discussion. And I agree with what Ted said with around labor unions. Labor unions are a big partner with us in this struggle. But we need to meet and like you said, this actually connects to the full employment situation. The jobs
Hmm.
are there, and this is a tangent when we talk about those jobs. What are those jobs? the the jobs are the challenges. The jobs are transportation jobs. The jobs are healthcare jobs. The jobs are mine reclamation jobs. Like, look around Appalachia. There's a lot of things to do. There's a lot of things to
Yes.
fix.
Yes. Yes.
And we need, like I said, to leverage the funding available and our collective power to inspire people to do that.
Well, and we also see a lot because of all the folks who come to Blue Rock Station over
Mm,
the years. We've seen a lot of people who live in areas that they find no longer desirable or affordable, like,
mm,
Washington, D.C. is an example where the cost of living is so high and their job is remote in
mm,
nature. And if they had broadband of any sort, they
mhm,
would love to relocate. So then we start to see an in migration because this is a beautiful region and very affordable, and because many of our jobs are virtual. We could then begin to see skilled labor force moving into the region as opposed to the best educated from this region moving out, and it all sort of rests on this infrastructure
mhm.
that no matter how much you want to pretend you can pull yourself up from the bootstraps and all of that kind of thing, I can't make an internet system. I can educate myself, I can work hard, but it's just not going to happen unless somebody is stepping in to create the infrastructure upon which I can shine.
Yeah.
I can
But that's
display
what
my
I'm talking
talents.
about. If we're not measuring the true cost. What does that cost us that we cannot engage with these people that physically and intellectually want to be where we are. They want to have a farm or live where it's rural and they can, go to the local pub. And um,
Well, and
what's the true cost
Well, and
to us
it
for that?
extends beyond that, because what you saw during COVID is the school systems went to a remote system, but much of this region could not participate in that.
Yeah.
They were so we have a 2-year hiatus of people who are already behind, and now they're further behind
Right.
because they can't take advantage of a remote educational system. Because as we saw during COVID and without COVID, people sitting in their cars at the local library
Or
hoping to
McDonald's.
tap in, or McDonald's,
Yeah.
because that's the only place they can do their homework.
But what's the true cost to that, to our region, that our kids are less because they can't access to do homework or do the testing or whatever?
Yeah.
I'm saying we're just not measuring everything I think we should be measuring if we want to make a scientific and economic.
So Natalia, go out and give them hell, because anytime we talk to a legislator or whatever, you can see it in their eyes. I've got broadband. What's the problem? They
Yeah, but I got to tell you,
absolutely don't have that kind of really empathy of saying, yeah, once I have it, problem solved. Well, guess what? The broadband people, drive up to their door just because they know where their bread is buttered.
yeah, but here's the thing. So during COVID, I testified before the Ohio legislature about the need for businesses, small businesses, to have access to broadband. And there were several people in that hearing who are in the legislature who said, I'm farmer, blah, blah, blah. And they're legislators, and I don't have good broadband. So they're sitting there with the same issues, and they're not fighting.
Right.
They're
But
just not fighting for
also,
it.
the very next day after you testified, they drove up to the front door and said, how can we get broadband into your house? Like, okay, you made a noise, so we're going to try and keep
That
you
made me
quiet.
so mad. I said, well, what about my neighbors? They have kids. And the guy looks at me like I slapped him. He said, look, ma'am, I got called to show up here at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning to talk to you. And I said, look, when you come here and you tell me you're going to bring that cable up and you're going to give that to my neighbors too, then I want to talk to you. Jay's like, why did you do that? I'm like, because
don't send them away, man.
It's not right. And I'd be embarrassed as hell. Excuse me, Adam, for cursing. I wasn't cursing. I was exacting a location.
It was emphasis.
That's right.
Punctuation.
But I was really angry about it because it didn't make any sense at all.
Okay. Well, we aren't going to solve this, but you're going to hold a forum on this, right?
We
Natalia,
better get to the community summit.
Well, no, the farm bill, and I wanted to see, because one of the other items that you guys are doing, and you guys at Reimagining Appalachia do an awful lot of stuff, and it feels to me like you're herding cats all over the place, including legislators. But one of the things was talking about how we can make the farm bill work in this region, and I was curious about that, because farm bill is a huge thing. Right. So what does that have in store for Appalachia?
Well, again, if you go to our website, chock full of stuff. We actually have been working. So for folks that don't know, the Farm Bill is just this giant bill that is negotiated. And I'm sorry, it just slipped my brain. How many years, Ted? How often is it?
I think it's every 3 years. I'm not sure.
Years. Yeah. So it is what it is. It deals with rural areas and agriculture, and also nutrition, and things like nutrition benefits and food programs. So things like SNAP benefits. So we have a platform that we've worked with 40 other organizations throughout Appalachia, like exhaustive number of meetings, to create a farm bill platform and take this platform to our federal legislators and say, hey, fight for us, and this is the things you should fight for.
Okay.
And yes.
Well, Natalia, Annie just reminded me that we're out of time. So
boy, we just got started.
Just say one thing about the community summit.
No, we don't. We're going to just direct you to the notes.
We'll have a link. We'll have a link.
Reimagineappalachia.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to Natalia Rudiak and Boettner, right? Boettner,
Yep.
Yes.
Right. Thank you so
and
much.
our Emmy award-winning producer Adam Rich. And we want to thank you for just spending a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother hopefully told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is
Play nice with others, eat your veggies, and clean up your own mess.
all right. Till next time. Bye bye.